Chris asked me several weeks ago to type something up for the newsletter about how excited I was for my new role at the church. And then 2 weeks ago, he said, can you preach on the 31st? So I figured, why type a few paragraphs when he's given me 20 minutes in the pulpit? And I can just talk and talk and talk. If I'm being completely honest, I couldn't write anything for the newsletter because excited was not the adjective that I was feeling. Stressed, frustrated, confused, unsure. Those sounded more accurate, but probably not what he was hoping to accomplish with my Leaf article. And if you have stopped by and asked me how things are going, I'm not one to generally sugarcoat things, so if my words didn't come across as my honest thoughts, my face surely did. I have no control over my facial expressions. I should stop here and make a statement. I'm not leaving my job. This isn't my resignation sermon. If you only pay attention every now and then, or if I lose you after the first few minutes, you could walk away from here thinking, I'm done. So call it a spoiler alert or whatever. But that isn't how this chapter ends. This isn't even the true subject matter of this message, but it was simply my inspiration for today. Have you ever felt called into something and you knew 100% it was meant to be? You had no reservations. You had an indescribable peace. You were excited about what was ahead and couldn't wait for the next step. I have. I can remember multiple times the excitement of getting a beyond a shadow of a doubt yes from God. Those are good. Those are nice, and those are fun. This job opportunity was not that experience for me. I had reservations, and I was hesitant. I was not confident, and there were many questions. So many questions. This new role would bring a lot of change to my life, a huge schedule change. My entire week had to be restructured, and for a creature of habit, that's a pretty big inconvenience. Not to mention, do you guys know what traffic is like on that bypass when you turn onto Cleveland Highway at 8 o'clock in the morning? That was my biggest fuss. I would come in every morning and say, Chris, I can't do this. I cannot make this drive every morning. It's driving me insane. It brought an uncertain and somewhat uncomfortable financial change. It brought an entirely different workload. The timing was questionable. It's Lindsay's senior year, and I do not want to miss a moment of it. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I needed a change from what I was doing, but I was afraid. I do not like change. And if I'm being completely honest, I was probably looking for an out, for a big no confirmation. I began praying very specific prayers, and ultimately I prayed time and time again that if I was not supposed to make this change, that God would just close the door. Just don't let it happen. And I began praying that prayer before Chris even took the job description to the HR committee. They met days later and were on board with the new position. Door one, open. After the HR committee made its recommendation, the finance committee needed to know that the new position could be funded. Again, I continued to pray that if this job wasn't meant for me, that my door be closed. Stepping out on faith, the finance committee agreed that the position would be a positive addition to our church, and they believed God would provide the funding. Door two, open. Now, it's important to point out that this new position was not created for me. This was a much needed addition to our church, and if I wasn't the person hired for the job, we would have found the perfect candidate. That was part of the discussion from the start. Whether it was me or someone else who the church felt was better suited, everyone involved in the conversations was on the same page. And I knew the role was being created, and I knew my name was in the discussions, but it wasn't until the first two committees met and all agreed that I was officially offered the job. So those first two doors that remained open had not necessarily been doors that I was going to walk through anyway. Then, when I was offered the job, the final door was, will my husband be on board with this? And we talked a little bit about what all of the change would mean, and he doesn't like uncertain change any more than I do. So I was confident that this was the door that was about to close, and my life would continue on as it had for the past 25 years. That was another key piece. I had been with my previous employer for 25 years. A couple of days later, I received a text from my husband while he was on shift at work, asking if I had made a decision about changing jobs. I told him no, and asked him if he had an opinion. I was fully expecting, and I don't think you should do it, response. And that would be the end of that. To my surprise, he simply responded with, I think you should change. Not only was God not closing doors, he was holding them wide open. So, why was I still questioning if this was the move I should make? Why was it so difficult for me to accept that this was the direction that God was calling me to go? There were days I thought I had talked myself out of making the change, and I would hear God remind me that he answered my one very specific prayer time and time again. Doors were not closed. When things are beyond my control, I have no problem turning them over 100% to God. But when decisions I make will affect my family and my time and my finances, and I'm able to choose the direction I take, it becomes more difficult for me to let go and accept that my faith in Jesus is the determining factor in every aspect of my life, not just the ones I can't handle anyway. I've spent 30 years teaching teenagers that God has their best interest at heart, that he is the one in control, and that if we want to live for him, we have to trust him with every part of our day, not just the parts that we can't manipulate on our own. I'm also real with these young people, so I let them know that sometimes it's difficult to let go and let God, even when we see firsthand what he can do. Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the confidence that we hope for that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. It's not enough to simply believe in God or believe that God exists. James reminds us that even the demons believe that God exists, and they tremble in terror at the mention of his name. The beginning point of faith is believing in God's character, that he is who he says he is. What I know about God's character leads me to believe that I can trust him and surrender my life to him completely. The final piece of faith is believing in his promises, that he will do what he says he will do. When we believe God will fulfill his promises, even though we don't see those promises materializing yet, that's when we demonstrate true faith. Hebrews 11 talks about people in biblical history who walked by faith and not by sight. And Hebrews 11:13 says, All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but saw it from a distance and welcomed it. Sometimes you're part of the story that when you step out on faith, it's not even intended for you. Sometimes it's somebody else's blessing, and you get to be a part of it. Society has conditioned us to respond based on our feelings. If it doesn't feel good, don't do it. So it's hard to comprehend why we would trust God completely when we don't fully understand his plan. I came across a quote by J.B. Phillips when I was preparing for this morning that said, "If God were small enough for me to figure out, he wouldn't be big enough for me to worship." I like it. Isaiah 55:8-9 says, "My thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord, and my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways." When you trust God, you don't have to understand the plan. You just follow his instruction. God makes it clear that we will never fully understand his ways. His ways are beyond our comprehension, and a lack of understanding does not excuse a lack of obedience. Let me say that again. A lack of understanding does not excuse a lack of obedience. There are regular events in our lives that cause us to believe in a certain or specific outcome. For example, I got in my car this morning fully expecting that it would get me to church, just as it has gotten me to my intended destinations almost every time that I've driven it in the past 5.5 years. Today, when I get home, I expect that my sweet pups will greet me like they do every single day. Tomorrow, when I wake up, I expect the sun will rise just like every other day in the past 49 years that I've been alive. I believe or have faith that these things will happen because they always have. There is no reason for me to believe that they won't continue. Now, my car is older with a lot of miles. And my Daisy dog is also older with a lot of miles. And my Channy dog is just crazy. But even still, I would be shocked if any of them performed or acted any differently than normal. If you know someone really well, like a family member or a really close, lifelong friend, and you really know them, you really know their character, you know that they were trustworthy and honest and an all-around good person, and they did something or suggested something that seemed a little off or different, but you really know them, and you know that they're reliable and only do good for others, you would likely trust them, even when you don't understand their thought process, because you know them. The Lord has provided for me without fail every day of my life. As a matter of fact, when I look back over the course of my life, the only time that things really didn't go well for me or work out as planned were the times that I decided to take charge and handle the situation the way I saw fit without seeking guidance or following godly counsel. And even then, even in those times when I placed more faith in my own assessment of the situation, God still provided for my needs. Times of struggle still existed, but he was still faithful in providing. I find myself putting trust in things or people who change. My God never changes. He is the same today as he was yesterday, and he will remain the same tomorrow. And his character is good and righteous and true and faithful. So why do we have such a hard time following the instructions when God gives them to us? It's been a long time since I went out on my own without seeking direction from God and following his direction. I consider myself a James 1 gal. James writes to the 12 tribes, the Jewish believers scattered abroad. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy." Not that part. "For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." James didn't say, if it doesn't feel good, it probably isn't God's direction. And he didn't say, only do what makes you happy. That's how you'll know it's the right thing. He's saying faith is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. The more you pay attention to what God is calling you to do and where he is calling you to go, and you follow without hesitation, the easier it becomes to live a faithful life. And I consider myself a James 1 gal, not because I get joyful about the trials, but because I know that living out my faith in a way that is pleasing to God has caused me to grow. I see a huge positive difference in the Amy of today versus the Amy of 20 years ago. What do you see when you look back on your life? Can you see the changes that God has made in your life? There are 365 verses that say, "Fear not." That is one verse for every day of the year, reminding us that we should not fear, because the one who created the heavens and the earth is in control. Fear is the number one barrier that keeps people from doing what God has called them to do. If we're going to grow, we have to learn to face fear head on. We want to walk by faith, but we want to guarantee ahead of time that everything will work out the way that we want it to work out before we take the first step. Do you pray God's will over your life? Do you ask him how he wants to use you? Do you ask him how you can help grow his kingdom? But then, do you refuse to take the first step because he hasn't revealed his entire plan? How many blessings have we missed because we don't want to be uncomfortable? Growth comes when people are willing to take that first step without the guarantee. That's trust. Growth comes when we are willing to trust enough to step out of our comfort zone. God desires for us to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Once you get comfortable being uncomfortable and begin following his direction without second guessing, you get to a point where it no longer matters where he's taking you, because anywhere he leads you, you know will be better than where you can take yourself. I followed his direction when I was full of uncertainty. It's been a month since I stepped out on faith and a prayer, and I have no idea where this road will lead. What I do know is that God was flinging doors wide open, and that means he has a plan, and I get to be a part of it. I love Jesus. I love my church. You, my church family, are one of the most precious pieces of my life. You have offered me sweet words of encouragement and have expressed how happy you are that I was able to step into this new role. You have left sweet cards and hand-picked flowers and a bag of Snickers that did not last nearly long enough. I also know that because I listen to God's voice, I get to be involved in further growing the ministries of Pleasant Grove Methodist Church in ways that I never dreamed before. I have no idea what that will ultimately look like, but I know I will not miss out on the blessings that He has in store because I said yes. What areas of your life do you need to stop overthinking and start following God's direction? Is He calling you to step out of your comfort zone and get uncomfortable? Maybe He's nudging you to make amends with someone or make some positive changes in your life so He can use you where He needs to use you. What's stopping you? When I look back over the months of prayer and confusion and frustration that came with a job change, it wasn't the job that God was calling me to that was the issue. I love working for Jesus. It was my personal comforts and habits that were holding me back and causing the reservation. Don't miss out on a blessing that He has in store for you because you're afraid of taking that first step. Ask Him, seek His guidance, be still and listen to His response. And know that He wouldn't ask you to go anywhere that He won't be walking right beside you.